Hey everyone. Quack, quack. If it walks like a duck, it's a bubble. You're watching Tech Strong Gang. Hey everyone, it's Alan Schimmel for Tech Strong Gang. I'm not in the studio if you couldn't tell today. I'm actually out in Napa Valley of all places for a JFrog Swamp Up conference I'll be at this week. We'll be streaming live from, so stay tuned for that starting tomorrow and Wednesday. But the gang stops for no one. And so I'm hosting the gang. Mike's on his way to Boston for a Spark conference. We've got a great gang lineup. Let me introduce you. Of course, we have our friend JP Morgenthau, Stephen Foskett, Yevgeny Karam, and Wiki Wang here on the gang today. Welcome, gang members. Let's jump right into it. Um, JP, all of a sudden, the bluebird of happiness is starting to drop droppings all over the AP story. There's people actually using the bubble word, uh, but at the same time, a new report out of Futurum says it's gaining transformational traction. I know you have strong thoughts on this, as does Stephen and probably the rest of us, but why don't you kick it off, JP? What do you think?
Sure. I think you cannot deny the ability and the strength of what this technology can do today. It needs to be tempered. I think it's right now in an overhyped cycle, but that doesn't mean that it also doesn't have tremendous capability to do real things. It is really good at creating content. And that content isn't just written word. In many cases, right now, it's actually software itself, which is a huge advantage for many companies right now today. Is the ability for uh, to use AI to actually help in the backlog of developing software. I'm going through this right now with an organization, and it takes time to mature. It doesn't happen overnight. You don't just put somebody, you don't give somebody Cursor or Windstream or one of those, and the next day they're experts. There's a lot of experimentation. There's a lot of trial and error in learning how to use these technologies effectively. But the proof points are there. And I think that is what is starting to change people's minds. I have seen it personally. You know, I took a semi believer who challenged me, said, prove it. Um, and, without knowing anything about their code base, I was able to do a legacy modernization of it and get 80% of it migrated to a new modern uh, language and framework. Now, interestingly enough, where I ran into a wall and it stopped me in my tracks was I know nothing about their application. So it does require subject matter expertise in the application itself, knowing what the app's supposed to do, how it's supposed to work, to go that extra, to take it the last mile. But that proof point, that early proof point, was enough to change, the semi-believer's mind to a believer. And so I think that's what's happening around the world right now is that non-believers, semi-believers are seeing proof points by those who do know how to use the tools and demonstrating a potential outcome, enough to bet on for sure.
Stephen, why don't you chime in here? I know you have some thoughts on this subject.
It's almost like we've talked about this before. Yes, I have some thoughts. So people tend to be irrationally exuberant about technology. It's just in our nature. Um, uh, and this happens every single time a new technology comes up. We imagine what it can do in the context of what we exist in today, and we try to fit it into that context. And in the case of LLMs and generative AI, we're looking at it with rose-colored glasses still, and we're seeing all of the potential that this technology has. That doesn't mean it doesn't have potential. You know, that the counter viewpoint to the bubble doesn't mean this stuff is useless. What it means is we need to hold our horses and find out what the true value of that is going to be. And what we're seeing, as is reported in this report, if you ask enterprises, they see a lot of potential in this. They see that this can be useful in many ways. They see the ways that this can be used to augment the capability and productivity of their employees, and that's actually happening. You know, Alan, you and I know all of our employees are encouraged to use AI technology as a tool, as a very powerful tool, just like we encourage them to use computers and cell phones and whatever else as a very powerful tool. And it really has helped their productivity, and it has helped them to do so many things. But that's not the same as refuting the bubble. The truth is we are 100% in a bubble of CapEx acquisition. And that's supported by the stories and what we're hearing from coming out of companies like Broadcom and NVIDIA in this absolutely off the charts purchasing. It's reflected in what you said in your Shimmy Says video. And it is reflected as well in the minds of a lot of the financial analysts that I'm talking to are saying, basically, buckle your seatbelts, folks, because this is about to get bumpy as the rationality comes to the overbuying of these things. I was talking to one of my friends who said that he was working with a big Wall Street bank, a name brand that you know. They had pallets of NVIDIA GPUs sitting on their loading dock floor, and they had spent literally hundreds of millions of dollars on AMD GPUs. They weren't sure, essentially they brought this guy in as a consultant, and their question was, now what? Like, what do we do with all of these things that we bought? We know they're supposed to be valuable, but what do we do with them? And these things had been sitting there for about 6 months, and they're not even the latest generation. Unfortunately, they've lost much of their value already because they haven't been productively used. That's the kind of bubble that we're in. Now, to your point about that maybe this is like previous bubbles where there was over purchasing of capital and over build out, and then eventually kind of we came in and absorbed that. It's true. I noticed that you were very careful. Maybe you were careful on this on purpose, Alan. You talked specifically about the infrastructure in energy sources, in data centers, and that sort of thing in terms of the bubble and the usefulness of this technology in the future. And I think you're right. Essentially, provisioning a lot of energy, provisioning a lot of data center space, et cetera. These things are going to be valuable resources in the future. What I question is the value of last year's NVIDIA GPUs in the future. That's what I wonder about in terms of the bubble.
My question. So based on what you guys saying, and let's think about this: is the problem is the bubble? Is the problem is the hardware, or the problem is we don't have enough people that know what to do with it?
I think it's a fundamental business case problem. Yeah.
Yeah, I do want to add some sense here,
Vicky?
right? So if I think within the AI ecosystem, people start to notice that and they did something ahead of time, right? If you look at this year's NVIDIA's conference, I forgot the name of the conference, but you can see in their keynotes, they mention something about quantum computing or some other way to use of their chips and the AI supporting system, right? They try to bring up the quantum computing in this bigger ecosystem and also talk about robotics or other stuff, try to see how they consume the additional chips or other stuff. People do think about that. But I do agree with Alan, there's a bubble because if you think about that, right, even the people who just retired or students in the elementary school, they're talking about AI, which means it's overhated, right? Everyone try to know about it, everyone talk about it, but only a few people start to really use it or leverage it. If you see the company, actually, when I look at the report of MIT Media Lab, right, they mention like 95% didn't work very well, only 5% work very well. Yeah, I also say there's a question from the compliance side asking, okay, if people start to use AI, how do we make sure everything is in place and work very well, right? Overheating is happening. The question for me is like how people try to dig into those like 95%, see how we can make the AI work better in those areas. Yeah.
So
So
here's the
go
issue.
ahead.
You have a technology that fundamentally affects it's B2C. It really is. It's a B2C technology. I mean, let's replace AI with cell phones. Everybody has one or more cell phones. The technology, when it emerged, right, it took a while. Not everybody had a cell phone at first, and then people started doing only if they needed it because it was so expensive. As costs dropped, obviously now everybody, even homeless people, have cell phones still. It's ubiquitous, and to some degree, AI has a little bit of that ubiquity built into what it is, right? So, and the other piece of it is it's a spectrum of technologies. There's AI infrastructure, there's AI applications, right? So these are applications that people build with AI built into it. And if I give an analogy, right, it's like when people said they were cloud, but really all they were doing was moving to Office 365 or Google Workspace. And they were like, we're using cloud. Are you? Well, to somebody who like me, who's technical and is like, leveraging AWS or, Google infrastructure, I'm like, you're not cloud. You're just, you're using SaaS. But that still counted for cloud revenue by Wall Street accounting methods. Okay, that was cloud revenue for Microsoft, cloud revenue for Google. In the same way, we have that going on here. Not everything that's called AI would be considered AI by AI purists, but if you're doing a Wall Street accounting, right, these are AI technologies. This is it being applied. For it to be a bubble, it would have to have irrational exuberance. And the thing is, it's not completely irrational because you have these different levels of the spectrum against which these technologies are being applied at different levels.
I hadn't thought of that analogy, JP. I just want to say that is a very good analogy, the cell phone world, because in that case, what we saw was exactly what we're seeing here, which was an incredibly capital-intensive rollout of a technology that will be obsolete by the time the business case comes along to use that technology. And that's sort of the problem. Essentially, that global rollout of 3G telecom that has just been sunsetted for good and turned off in most countries this year is exactly what's going to happen to those sort of first generation data centers full of first generation, AI accelerators. None of those are going to be used productively. It was a huge drain on resources. It was a huge drain on capital, but having that infrastructure in place meant that people could start becoming dependent on that infrastructure. And so the next generation becomes profitable. I think you're maybe onto something there.
So I think this is a quantum problem, right? It is both successful and a bubble at the same time. The problem with our bubble, with the bubble end of the equation, is the irrational exuberance of how quickly and how profoundly it's going to change things. And it may profoundly change things. Just maybe not as quickly as we're betting our money on. And in some extent, it already has changed things. JP, I would disagree with you, though, in saying it's strictly a consumer technology. I think the recent report from the Futurum team and other things we've seen, right? Something like a majority of the code being generated today has AI fingerprints on it, if you will. Whether AI generated the code, tested the code, a majority of the code has AI fingerprints. This is being done at the enterprise level. I said this on a previous gang episode. If we stop developing AI right now, we stop going after super intelligence and AGI and all of these, I don't want to say pie in the sky, but all of these, singularity moments, it would still take the tech industry, I think, 5 to 7 years to digest what we have the capability of with today's AI to do, right? And not just tech, it filters across into, I have an article up I co-authored with my good friend Bill Brenner from Cyber Risk Alliance. I don't know if any of you guys know Bill. Bill and I wrote an article about AI as therapist, right? The recent case in the New York Times, a mother wrote a heart-wrenching story of her daughter who was kind of confiding in her therapist, Harry, who's ChatGPT. And Harry said all the right things, and her daughter committed suicide anyway. Right? We need to get better at that. But at the same time, I do think we have to recognize this is, as I said in the outset, if it quacks like a duck, if it walks like a duck, it's usually a duck.
Alan,
And this has, go, Evgeny.
I think the biggest change for us going to be when this duck going to be walking in our house, where we're going to have AI-enabled dogs, where we're going to, like robots. When we have robots walking in the house, cooking for us, taking our trash out, washing our dishes, maybe potentially babysitting our kids, towards what you're saying, this is going to be the biggest impact in my mind. Because now, are we becoming lazy? What are we doing? What are we not doing? Are we sitting and meditating the entire day, running, doing retreats? And then it's kind of basically become a butterfly effect. What do we teach our kids? What do they need to learn? What are they going to do when they grow up? And I don't have an answer for all this, but it's a problem.
I call that the Wally world kind of syndrome, right? Where we're just going to get so lazy and dependent on AI doing things, we lose the ability to do them ourselves, and that's not good.
See, I was thinking vacation Wally World. I thought what you were going to say is we're going to get there and then be really disappointed.
Well, we'll have to take grandma off the top of the car.
Exactly.
But no, I meant, humans as corpuscles. But, so it is a little of both. I'd encourage you all out there to go check out that Futurum report if you can. There's a bunch of stories, obviously, on techstrong.ai. We all have strong feelings on this. And many of us have been around the block more than a few times, and we've seen the hype cycles, right? And I'll leave it with this. Nothing ever truly lives up to the top of the hype cycle, and nothing ever truly goes down to the bottom of the trough of disillusionment. Reality is always in that middle somewhere. And it's probably the case here too. So let's take a break on TechStrong Gang. We're going to come back and talk about OPA. No, it's not Oktoberfest. We'll be back.
Discover TechStrong Group, the epicenter of tech innovation. We're your go-to for reaching IT leaders and practitioners worldwide. Our secret? Impactful content that sparks awareness, engagement, and top-quality leads. With us, you'll access editorial websites, streaming videos, virtual events, custom content, analyst research, and more. Join our satisfied clients. Let's revolutionize your tech journey. Contact us today and tell your story to the world in the most powerful way with TechStrong Group.
So Apple being Apple, they did a very Apple-like thing. They were big proponents of something called the Open Policy Agent, OPA, which is a CNCF-owned and operated open source project. But it was started by the folks over at a company called Styra. And Styra was still the leading lights in continuing development of OPA and leading that community. Well, APA did a sort of an acqui-hire without the aqua, right? They did not buy Stryer at all. They just hired the entire engineering team, including the co-founders, including the co-founders of OPA, and kind of left the company as a shell, a husk, with their corporate customers receiving letters saying, "Look, very sorry, but your support won't be going forward. Here's the good news: we've taken all of the enterprise functionality of the Stryer product and donated that to the CNCF's OPA project." Wiki, that's not a nice thing to do to your customers or your former customers, but what's your take on this one?
Yeah, actually, I want to talk about this piece from two perspectives, right? One is from the merger and acquisition trends. The other one is from the compliance customer perspective. Maybe talk about the customer piece first. I personally feel it's very interesting trend. If you say something like that, right? If I'm the person who manage the security or product vendor side, I may feel like, oh, this is a big surprise, right? I'm working with a stable company, but suddenly the things which may have impact to my company's operational effective now move to an open source foundation, right? And we're not sure who's the responsible person yet. So I think normally, like when my friends talk to me regarding, okay, what's my plan next, from the compliance or security perspective, I first suggest them to find out what's a official communication channel about this, right? So they can get latest information and see if they have the transitional supporting plan for the customers. Otherwise, it's kind of like, oh, after I finish my business, I go to a good place. I just quickly hand over to nowhere, and my customer is struggling for the future supporting, which is not a good way to do. So, from the customer perspective, I do need a transitional supporting plan. Try to understand during this grace period who's going to take care, right? And in the future, if the open source um, ecosystem will have the enough support for me. And from the customer perspective, I'll also check the current contract, LSA, and decide my transition strategy. Try to understand, do I need to stay or do I need to leave, right? At least to do something like export my data and confirm new obligations. Make sure I have something to support myself or there's a backup plan. And try to find out the replacement plan and details, who will take care of me in the future, right? This is the customer side. And from the merger and acquisition trends, recently I do see there's a big trend, like people try to do the acquire to hire stuff, right? You can see the Vizard, which is a biggest case recently. The Google take care of their founders, core team, and some of the I should say little bit product, right? And the rest of the team went to a company called um it,
Trying to
yeah,
think myself.
called
But someone bought the rest of the
yeah,
company,
I can
right?
see there's a trend
It's
like
very weird.
the rest of the team, they went to some like old competitors so people can take care of the business, and they also acquire that part of the customers. The customer will have a good take care of way, and also have a good supporting system in the future. I think that's a best plan for the acquire to hire case. The customer got good take care, and the new company got a new customer base, right? And they also acquire rest of the talents, which is very nice as well. Even though after they also have other story as well. um,
So in the case you're talking about, Google got a license to use the IP, but the original company still own the IP. So when the second company bought it, it wasn't just, they still had that IP to use, but Google has a license to use that IP too, right? So they, in essence, you bought the company without its biggest customer, maybe who's now your biggest competitor. But what's interesting, different in this case, Wiki, is they didn't even buy the company. They just hired the people flat out.
That's a part I try to suggest their customer to have the transitional supporting plan and see if what's their transitional strategy, right? Do they still want to stay with the current product, or they should find out some alternatives? Because now it's not very clear what's the next for the supporting system, which is very important for the product like this, right? This is kind of like the product, what we call kind of like policy engine, right? That powers Kubernetes, API, and microservices. Those are all key stuff. From the security perspective, if I'm the customer, I need to think a lot here. Yeah.
What happens
Sure.
if you buy a company and then close the business and just get it for the code? So yes, I think it's a bit of a nasty move to just hire the people and not get the company. But we can have the same problem. I can buy the entire company and just, okay, we're closing everything and we're moving the code. So effectively, we are achieving the same problem for the customer. And it happened with other.
Well,
And
Stephen,
Apple
I
has
see you.
done that in the past. I mean, Apple has bought acqui-hired the team of companies and kind of left people high and dry. I mean, I'm thinking, Dark Skies with the weather. They did that with some navigation and localization services. And I think in this case, CNCF and open source is saving us from that and saving
Absolutely.
their customers from that. I say bravo.
Yep, absolutely. And I will tell you, so I wrote this story that's on your ticker. Since writing this story, I've had 4 companies who either support OPA, right? Will have commercial support for OPA, or have OPA alternatives, but that integrate with that. They view this as it's Christmas Day, right? They're opening their presents, right? And what an opportunity! Of course, Styra was the biggest player, and Wiki, I think you said it. This OPA piece of functionality is embedded into so much of the cloud native infrastructure, and huge enterprises use it. But Stephen, to your point, this is a tremendous example of why we need foundational open source, where we're not dependent on any one company or any company coming in with some deep pockets and leaving everyone else high and dry.
And why companies should insist that foundational technologies like OPA are open source, because it means that they won't be left with a bunch of abandonware.
Agreed. I'm going to be doing a follow-up on this with some alternatives for people out there who are wondering. But let me just say this. I don't want to make the Styra co-founders and people out to be villains here. Right? You work really hard, you build a company, someone comes by. I'm sure Apple didn't hire them for $1. Right? Apple probably paid a pretty penny. And it's hard to sit there and say, oh, let me do what's right for the community. And in some ways, they think they did. They donated the enterprise functionality back to the community. And they went off to go get their jobs and make their money. So, they're not the villain here. They're not the villain. Anyway, let's take a break on the gang. We're going to come back, and we've got this next one's right out of Hollywood. Crazy story. You're watching TechStrong Gang.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
Hey everyone, we're back. So this one's kind of like right out of a Leonardo DiCaprio Catch Me If You Can kind of story. When I first heard about it, I assumed it was nonsense, but it appears that a young AI engineer working for Elon's Grok, XAI, somehow was able to get the source code to the entire Grok AI. Not only get it, download it, exfiltrate it, take it out, and give it to OpenAI. I don't know if it was a quid pro quo for getting a job there or just his little gift for coming on board there, but he then quit Grok and went to work for OpenAI. Oh, and by the way, before he quit Grok, he was sitting on about $7 million worth of shares in XAI. As part of his employment there. Well, he sold that too, figuring once the source code's gone, I might as well grab my money while I can, and grab the money as well. Yevgeny, are we going to see this in IMAX soon, or what's the story?
It's a very interesting story. And when we started the show, you mentioned about hype cycle. Something goes up and down. Why I'm bringing this up? Because we have something called DLP, data leakage prevention. DLP been around for a long time. We all know version 4, 5, whatever you want to call it. And everybody complained about how hard is DLP, how hard is to secure the data. And every 5 years, we have a new generation of companies to secure this. So we have a very classic example of people trying to secure the data without impacting the employee performance or employee way to work. And we all know developers are the ones that are very, very demanding. They want admin rights. They want to install their own stuff. They need to do stuff. And especially if they're very ahead of the curve, if they're very innovating, they probably want more access. And it's very hard to understand how we give them access without making sure they can do stuff. USB key, cloud uploads, SSL inspection, SASE, SAC. There are so many different ways to protect the information. But as an architect, and I've been doing solution architecture for a very long time, it is very hard to understand exactly the best way to protect the data, especially when the employee has admin rights. In most of the cases, we can get logs and understanding, but this is a very classic example. He did something, we don't really know exactly how he took the data, if it's a USB, if it's a cloud, if it's an email, but it's not a very big file. It's not going to be terabytes of data. It's going to be probably something that you can put on a floppy disk.
I don't think it was probably a floppy disk. I'm going to go out on a limb.
You're right.
Probably not.
Probably not.
3.5 or 5 1/4.
I'm bringing floppy disk because I had a floppy disk that my son found yesterday. He's like, Dad, what is this? He's like, it's a very old USB key. He's like, what do you put it in? He's like, I have no idea. There's nowhere to put it in right now. He's like, how many people I can put
How
here?
come this looks like the save button? I don't understand. Is this a... yeah.
So, yeah, it is.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I try to understand this one a little bit better. As you mentioned, there's a data loss protection stuff, right? Normally, company will have it. How come their legal department didn't give the warning before this person leave? This is a question mark from Kamal's perspective. Well,
I think it's a very,
This is the whole thing here.
it's very classic. It's a big
If we're
company.
just going to look at the DLP perspective of it, Evgeny, as you are here, right? One has to question, does XAI even have DLP? Wiki, does their personnel department have processes in place to make sure employees haven't taken any company properties or IP, right? Elon runs it lean and mean, and sometimes lean and mean comes back to bite you in the butt.
And there was a problem in Tesla. Just give me 1 second, JP, if I may. There was a problem in Tesla about 2 years ago. Somebody left this information as well. So there's probably already a precedent in before to understand. Maybe there is DLP. Maybe there's nobody watching the DLP. I don't know.
It's not even, I mean, look, the only way for them to institute governance around this is you can't bring any of your own external outside equipment in. Yeah, it's almost like creating a SCIF, right? No cell phones around our computers. You know USBs. We're going to put you through an X-ray when you come in. By the way, there are places where this happens, right? There are plenty of government contracted facilities in which this is common practice. To
Is it
avoid
work from home
this,
or not?
that's the issue. But to Evgeny's point earlier, when you are developing next generation technology, it's hard to implement controls when you are without stymieing the innovation, right? Because the last thing you want is for the developers to run up against security hurdles and walls while they're trying to build and test code, right? I can't get to that server without permission. Now I'm wasting a week waiting for paperwork, or I can't get the resources I need in order to execute, especially the AI stuff. I can't get to the GPUs. I can't get allocated enough without getting clearances from 4 levels of supervisors. All that kind of stuff just slows you down, right? So that balance between governance and controls versus innovation is a really
It
tough
is a
one.
tough one, but like from the data classification perspective, the source code, I think it's as important as the financial data. They should have very high rank of the classification number, right? Not sure like what happens here, but let's find out
Yeah.
later.
Well, let's also consider, I want to point out too about this story, the dates that this happened and the companies involved. So I'm going to, I don't want to make a conspiracy here. I don't want to be putting string and thumbtacks on the wall and stuff like that. This happened, in the early 2024. So well over a year ago before the lawsuit was filed. It happened at xAI and OpenAI, which we know, Elon Musk was one of the founders of OpenAI. He's been going after the company for a long time. He's actively engaging in litigation against them. xAI has had its share of PR gaffes and so on lately. I wonder if they knew about this for a long time and really didn't care and only brought this up now because it serves their PR purposes. And I wonder if this story essentially is a giant nothing burger, that the guy stole a bunch of outdated stuff a long time ago and nobody cared until they felt that they could get some kind of value out of attacking.
Well, no,
OpenAI.
it goes one better, Stephen. They have open sourced their code, right? xAI has open sourced the code. So, it is a nothing burger
We don't know
on
that they've
that.
open sourced this code. Let's just be clear about that.
Okay, yeah, it may not be this particular, but they've supposedly it's being open sourced. But, the bigger issue here is why isn't what kind of company is OpenAI? And where are their scruples? Why aren't they being in the old days, Stephen, remember, they would have to disgorge themselves of that code, and anything they were working on would have to be shown to be in a clean room environment where they didn't even use that, right? And the people who had access to that weren't working on. There used to be rules around stuff like this. What the hell's going on? Secondly, we're in such a rush to hire AI engineering talent. Where are the penalties to this kid who did this, right? He got a $7 million windfall. Now, one might say, well, he was entitled to that $7 million for the work he did there. It has nothing to do. But it's almost like fruit of a poisonous tree, right? He got a $7 million windfall, and he's going to work at OpenAI, probably making a small fortune there. Where is the penalty for doing what we would consider a criminal act?
Are you suggesting that xAI and OpenAI are acting in a way that's unethical with regard to data? I'm shocked to find gambling going on here.
Yeah, exactly. Shocking. But seriously, we used to have rules, because this sort of stuff has happened before. Maybe not with AI, But we've had, companies raid other companies' employees, and IP gets out with them, mailing list, customer list, trade secrets. And we've all probably signed the agreements. I don't know how many of you have read them carefully about what, how you have to handle company confidential information. And when you leave, you can't, we have non-competes and stuff like that. It's all out the window now because we're so hot and heavy to go hire anyone who claims to be an AI engineer. It's crazy.
Well, I don't want to bring another story in here, but we did just see Anthropic, who's not named in any of this story, agree to pay $1.5 billion. That's $3,000 per copyrighted work for copyright infringement. So, there's a lot of crazy high dollar, let's say, legally questionable stuff happening here. And yeah.
No doubt about it. Meantime, who's signing up to be an AI engineer? Guys, we're about out of time, and I need to get over to this JFrog Swamp Up event we're doing. Wiki, Evgeny, JP as always, Stephen, thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us. We have a full TechStrong TV lineup today for you. Check that out. We'll be back tomorrow with another fresh TechStrong gang. But in the meantime, everyone, enjoy your Tuesday, and we will talk to you later.